Greetings, everyone. Always a pleasure to be with you. This morning, we are going to go into a subject called the law, God's law. And it's a big subject, and it's too big to cover in one particular session. So, my guess is there'll be another session to follow and possibly a third. At any rate, when we think of the law is from the Hebrew word Torah. Actually, the root is yara. And anytime you go and look up a word in the Hebrew dictionary, it'll always give it to you in third person singular. And therefore, there we have yara. Now, you can hear the difference, yara, Torah. So when we go from the verb, we go to the noun, Torah, which in essence means teaching. So if you're talking about yara, you mean to teach, to instruct, to point out. And the noun portion is the teaching, is the instruction. If anybody is looking for a title for this message, we'll let Isaiah give us the title. So if you'll turn to Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 20, where we read, to the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Look at the word law, look at the word testimony, and look at the word. And we will find that they are intertwined. They're inseparable. And in essence, they form a composite whole, the way God has designed his message. Fascinating. And we'll see that. All right. Let us now look at two scriptures where we have the words for law stretched out, sort of like pearls on a string. The first one is going to be Deuteronomy. And that's going to be Deuteronomy chapter 11. Deuteronomy chapter 11, and we will pick it up in, here we go, yes, Deuteronomy chapter 11 and verse 1. Therefore, you shall love the Lord your God and keep his charge, his statutes, his judgments, and his commandments always. But the particular verse that has more of them lined up is Genesis 26. And we've all been there many times. Genesis chapter 26. This is the place where God has been talking to Isaac, telling him, do not go down to the Philistines, stay where you are. I will bless you because, verse 5, because Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Now, this is a Hebrew method of stringing pearls on a string. Normally, you just don't see the law or the commandments. From time to time, you do, but God strings them out. They're all synonyms, and they end up with my laws, Torah. But just before we get into Torah, I thought I would offer a little tidbit here. You will notice it says, kept my charge. What does that mean? Was there a specific charge that God gave Abraham that's referring to? No. You can find the same thing in Deuteronomy 11. This is a humorous play on words. But God doesn't put it in there in a superficial manner. The word kept and the word charge, they're the same in Hebrew. The same. Well, what do you mean, kept my charge the same? Well, you see, the Hebrew comes from shamar, which actually, in this particular case, means to keep. And so what God is saying is, you want to put it literally, Abraham did keep what I told him to keep. In other words, he kept the word of God. He kept all of God's instructions. But this is how God worded it for some reason. It took me years and years to figure that out until I finally, you've heard me say so many times, when all else fails, go to the Hebrew. And sure enough, so Abraham kept what God told him to keep. That's all it means. There's nothing mysterious about it. Okay, now let's take a look at this word Torah. Torah means instruction. It is the umbrella word for commandments, statutes, ordinances, precepts, and so forth. And it means any instruction. You can go to a college course and listen. I don't care what the course is. Torah. Has anybody played any board games? Monopoly, Game of Life, Careers, Clue, you name it. You open up the game, and they're either on the back side of the cover or inside of a few pages. We have what? The instructions. In Hebrew, that is Torah. It is simply instruction. Instruction from any source. It doesn't matter. Now let's look at three particular scriptures where we have Torah, and it's not really from God. Might as well be. Turn to Proverbs, please. And we'll try to get this underway here from the book of Proverbs, right after the book of Psalms. And the first one will be in the first chapter of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8. My son, hear the instruction of your father. Forsake not the law of your mother. And I remember thinking, what law am I going to get from my mother? Finally, I realized that, you stupid fool. It says, do what mommy says. That's all it means. Here's mommy, she's baking a cake and making a dinner, but she's lacking a few ingredients. And so she says, son, here's some money. Go out the door, down the street, no jaywalking, cross the street, go to the store, buy these items, and bring them back. That is the law of the mother. Do what mommy says, mommy's instructions. That's all it is. It's not some great concept put up on a pedestal. Now, when we get to God's instruction, well, yeah, then we need to put it up on a pedestal. Okay, that is Proverbs 1. Now look at Proverbs 3, just across the page. My son, do not forget my law. Once again, this is the father saying, son, don't forget what I told you to do. Again, that's all it is. And now we'll look at one more, chapter 6. Chapter 6 and verse 20. My son, keep your father's commandments and do not forsake the instruction of your mother. Again, same word, Torah. Here we did translate it instruction. Elsewhere you translated law. It's the same thing. But that's all it means. Now, as I said, Torah is the umbrella word. Now, God told us that his Messiah, the Christ, would magnify that law. Turn to Isaiah chapter 42. Isaiah chapter 42 and verse 21. Isaiah 42 and verse 21. And you see the specific statement, no uncertain term. 42 and verse 21. One page over. Here we are. The Lord is well pleased for his righteousness' sake. He will magnify the Torah and make it glorious. He will magnify the teaching, the instruction. Did Jesus do that? Sermon on the Mount. Let's turn over to Matthew. Actually, it's kind of cute. I remember humorously in my own life, as a sophomore in high school, and for some reason, I don't know how, I don't remember, the instructor got off on the Beatitudes. And he asked, how many of you have never heard of the Beatitudes? I kind of sheepishly raised my hand. Nobody else did. And the instructor looked at me and said, "Oh, well, I can understand why you've never heard of the Beatitudes. It's not exactly a household item in a Jewish home." But anyway, look at chapter 5. Chapter 5. And you can take the first 10, 12 verses. He opened his mouth, verse 2, and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Verse 4, "Blessed are those who mourn." You didn't find this in the Old Testament. He's elevating. Now look just across the page. Verse 21, "You have heard that it was said to those in ancient times, you shall not commit murder, but whoever commits murder shall be subject to judgment. But I say unto you," he's expanding it, he's elevating it. And the same thing is true right at the bottom, verse 27. "You have heard that it was said to those in ancient times, you shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you," again, he expanded the law. Now, it is fascinating because God is a covenant-making God. And he used his law in 2 covenants, at least, to judge the children of Israel when they went into the land. Turn to Deuteronomy. Turn to Deuteronomy, in this case, Deuteronomy 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5, and toward the end of the chapter, here's God saying to Moses, "Go say to them, go to your tents. But as for you, stand here by me, and I will speak to you in all the commandments and statutes and judgments." Notice that. Commandments, statutes, and judgments, which you shall teach them, that they may do them in the land which I am giving them to possess it. And you shall be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded. You shall not turn aside to the right or to the left. You shall walk in the ways which the Lord your God has commanded you. All right. Then beginning chapter 6. "Now these are the commandments." Again, you see we have it in trios. You see this often throughout the Old Testament. "These are the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments which the Lord our God commanded to teach you." Now from Deuteronomy 6, clear through Deuteronomy 28, constitutes a separate covenant that God made with Israel. And it is to be part of the testimony that we read earlier in Isaiah. Let's go past Deuteronomy 28 to Deuteronomy 29. Deuteronomy 29, verse 1. "These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them in Horeb." This is something completely different. Now, it's all teaching from God. It is all Torah, but it's a separate covenant. And we will see what God did with this particular covenant. He placed it inside the ark. So, now let us look at the book of Deuteronomy here. Deuteronomy 30, verse 10. Almost just across the page. Well, turn the page actually. "If you shall obey the voice of the Lord your God, keep his commandments, his statutes, which are written in this book of the law." Now remember, this is the book of Torah. And what does it consist of? Deuteronomy. This book doesn't consist of anything else. It is the book of the law and has a separate status all by itself. "For this commandment," verse 11, "which I command you today, is not hidden from you." Verse 12, "It's not in heaven." Verse 13, "Neither is it beyond the sea." but the word of God is very near to you. And verse 16, in that I command you this day to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, keep his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments. Okay, we have that. Now, let's look at Deuteronomy 31. Again, almost on the same page. Beginning in verse 9. And Moses wrote this book and delivered it to the priests, the sons of Levi. They carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. And here's the significance of this book of Deuteronomy. And Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of 7 years, at the set time of the year of release, the year of release, Jubilee year, in the Feast of Tabernacles, also every 7 years, sabbatical year as well, but it culminates in the year of Jubilee. Of 7 years, the year of release, in the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Israel has come to appear before the Lord your God in the place which he shall choose. Now, you and I are blessed. We have this whole book. We can read it anytime, day or night. It doesn't matter. But back then, they only had a scroll, so to speak. And they didn't even have individual scrolls. They had one scroll. And that scroll, that tapestry, so to speak, that material was going to be placed, as we will see, in the ark. And that was going to be in the tabernacle. And that's one reason we'll see the ark of the testimony, the tabernacle of the testimony, because this book of Deuteronomy, as well as God's 10 commandments, constitute the testimony, the law, the testament. It's an amazing concept here. So now we'll go to verse 12 here. No, we can skip verse 12. We'll go to verse 24, 26. And it came to pass when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book until they were finished. And Moses commanded the Levites who carried the ark of the covenant, saying, take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant. Why is it called the Ark of the Covenant? Well, because this book of Deuteronomy is a covenant. And this covenant is going to be in the ark. And then they're going to put the ark in the tabernacle. So the tabernacle is going to be the tabernacle of the testimony, because it's all coming from God. All of it. Okay. So it's going to be put to take this book of the law, verse 26, put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God. So we have that. It went into the ark of the covenant. So now let us go ahead and consider the testimony. Remember in Isaiah 8:20, to the law and the testimony? Torah and testimony are very close. Let's look at Exodus 40. Exodus chapter 40. Exodus chapter 40, and we will read it in verse 20 and 21. And he took, this is Moses, and placed the testimony into the ark. Okay, what's the testimony? He's putting the testimony into the ark and set the staves up. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle and set up the veil of the covering and covered the ark of the testimony. What did he just put in the ark? The book of Deuteronomy. Therefore, the Deuteronomy is also the testimony. And so we'll see when Isaiah said to the law and the testimony, meaning to the Torah, to God's instruction and his declaration. You know, in the court of law, you're going to have witnesses, and we say they're going to be sworn in. And so there's the individual from saying, oh, raise your right hand and all this stuff. And he says, do you declare, do you affirm, whatever the words are going to be, that the testimony that you are about to give. So a testimony is a narration. It's a declaration of what is going to be said and that it is true. Look at Exodus 20. Here we have the giving of God's 10 commandments. And look what it says. Verse 1. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, of the house of bondage. Here it is. There's his testimony. There's his declaration, who I am. Therefore, because I am who I am, and I have authority to declare the law, the testimony, I'm now giving it to you. And then we have the 10 words. And they're given in the form of words. Remember Isaiah 8:20? To the law and the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, what word? The word of the testimony, the word of Torah, the word of what God had given them. It's all there. Now let's go and look at Deuteronomy 10. Well, first we'll go to Exodus 31:18. These have to be put in order. And sometimes if you don't get them in order, you lose the train of thought here. But here we're going to go. We're going to go to Exodus chapter 31, and it's going to be verse 18. And he gave to Moses, this is God speaking up on Mount Sinai, when he had made an end of speaking with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tablets of stone. 2 tablets of the testimony. So here God is declaring his testimony. The 10 commandments on the tablets of stone constitute the testimony. God is telling us that. Tablets of stone written by the finger of God. Now, does anybody need any more authority than that? I don't think so. Now then, we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 10. Deuteronomy chapter 10. And we'll see how these words, all of them, they fit together. Deuteronomy chapter 10. This is Moses speaking to the children of Israel. At that time, the Lord said to me, cut out 2 tables of stone. Right, cut out the 2 tables like the first and come up to me into the mountain and make for yourself an ark of wood. Okay, now we're going to have the ark constructed. And I will write on the tablets the words that were in the first tablets which you broke. God may be chiding Moses here a little bit, I'm not sure. But nevertheless, you broke them, Moses. So we're having a replacement here. And you shall put them in the ark. So in the ark of God, we know we had a few things. We know we had Aaron's budding rod. We know we had a container of manna. And we have at least 2 sections of the law. Book of Deuteronomy, and here, the tablets of stone. And then he goes on to say, and verse 4, and he wrote on the tablets according to the first writing, the 10 commandments. That's what was on those tablets. Right. Which the Lord spoke to you in the mountain out of the midst of the fire in the day of assembly, and the Lord gave them to me. And verse 5, and I turned myself, came down from the mountain, and put the tablets in the ark which I had made. And there they are, as the Lord commanded. So we have the ark as testimony, because the covenant, the law was there. The tabernacle, which housed the ark, was called the tabernacle of testimony. That's why they're called that. That's why they're titled that. So we see a complete, comprehensive picture. That's what Torah is. Torah is the overall instruction from God. And all of it bears his testimony. He testifies that this is true, holy, righteous, because I am the Lord your God. No other authority. That's his declaration. That's his testimony. And the words as a whole are testimony. Look what Jesus said when he was tempted by the devil. Matthew 4. Matthew chapter 4. And this also confirmed what we have just read. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 4. And verse 3, we know the tempter came to him and said, if you're the Son of God, go ahead and show us. Tempting. If Jesus had done that, he really wouldn't have been Son of God properly. But he answered and said, it is written, men shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Now, next week, when we go into perhaps some of the statutes and ordinances, but specifically the commandments, one of the words for commandment is pay. Pay is mouth. God commands out of his mouth. That's what Jesus just said. But by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God, it's coming from him. And he said, word. That sums up once again Isaiah 8 and verse 20. To the law and the testimony, the Torah and the testimony. And if they speak not according to this word, what word? The word of the law and the testimony. The word that, as Jesus said, proceeds forth out of the mouth of God. That's because there's no light. Well, this sums us up for today in terms of Torah and testimony. Next time, hopefully, we will get into the commandments and the words, what they are. And if time permits in the second section, we'll also see the difference between statutes and ordinances, because each one has a specific place. In some cases, it's like a distinction without a difference. In some cases, they are so intertwined that it's almost impossible to tell whether you're dealing with an ordinance or a statute. It all depends on circumstances. Anyway, that completes us for today. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful Sabbath, and let's look forward to hearing Fred's message.